Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington and a prominent figure in the Catholic Church, has submitted his resignation to Pope Francis amid a sexual abuse scandal. McCarrick was removed from public ministry in June after church officials substantiated allegations that he sexually abused a teenage altar boy 47 years ago as a priest in New York. The 88-year-old is reportedly the first cardinal to step down because of sexual abuse allegations. Joining us now on set is Candida Moss. She's the Cadbury Professor of Theology at the University of Birmingham and a papal news contributor for CBS. Candida, I want to ask you, what do you make of this resignation and what's the message that's being sent?
I think the message that's being sent by the Vatican is that they will not tolerate this. They have moved swiftly. It seems that Cardinal McCarrick has been stripped of his title as cardinal, which hasn't happened since 1927, when the last cardinal successfully resigned. And he's been placed into seclusion, into a life of prayer and penitence. And that has happened before there has even been a church tribunal. So certainly the message sent by the Vatican is that they will move swiftly.
I'm one of these victims. A life of prayer and penitence. Wasn't that what he was doing before?
It's a good point. In comparison to incarceration in the general population, it just doesn't seem that bad. And that's one of the issues that the church has to tackle here. The idea that you have an elderly man who seems to have gotten away with it.
Not only gotten away with it, but how was this man elevated to cardinal without any sort of background check? Do they not do that?
That's an excellent point. So the first complaint against McCarrick was lodged in 1994, and there were subsequent complaints, and he became a cardinal in 2001. So why is it that he could possibly be elevated to this position? Does no one do background checks? It certainly doesn't seem that he's going through anything as rigorous as sort of a Supreme Court justice would go through. And we have to ask, why isn't that happening?
So ultimately, he's just not going to pay a price. Is that what it comes down to?
Well, certainly he has been removed from public ministry, and Pope Francis himself actually spent a period where he wasn't allowed to celebrate the Mass. He could only hear confessions. And that was a very dark period for him, where he had to think about his own sins. So I think for Francis, he thinks that this kind of seclusion is a penalty that he will be paying. And there's no telling what kind of access he's going to have to family members or the outside world, or how comfortable that existence will be. So and also we don't know what will happen after the church tribunal. Maybe he will be formally incarcerated.
How does this compare to the treatment of Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston?
So when you think about Bernard Law, and let's bear in mind that it was a different kind of crime. So Bernard Law concealed sexual abuse. He wasn't accused of being a predator himself. Not that I'm saying that's not a serious crime. But Bernard Law was allowed to stay as a cardinal after the accusations had been levied. And in fact, he is still enjoys that privilege after his death and was still referred to as Your Eminence.
What are people saying, though, within? Have you heard from the folks within the Catholic Church about his removal? And do they feel like there's going to ultimately ever be some complete resolution to all of this? Because we every few months we hear something new. It doesn't go away.
A lot of the conversation is surrounding the allegations involving the seminarians. So we haven't really seen this before. It's kind of the Catholic Church's Me Too moment, that the Catholic Church is addressing the fact that it's not just the Catholic clerics preying on the laity, it's also just powerful individual predators preying on vulnerable members of the Catholic community at large. And what is this going to mean for vocations in the future?
You look at the Catholic churches throughout the world. We know that Chile is experiencing massive issues of abuse and cover-up. We know in Pennsylvania there's a 900-page grand jury report that's coming out. Will the Catholic Church ever be able to get their arms around this?
I think what has to happen is more time. These people have to die, to put it bluntly.
And that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, many of these predators are aged between 65 and 90. And as they die, there will be less calls for accountability with people who seem to have escaped notice.
Are we convinced, though, that these young priests who are coming up within the ranks, that there is no misconduct, that they haven't maybe picked up from the older clergymen? I mean, how do we know that this younger generation, that the church is dealing better with these younger priests?
Well, we don't know. And that is what has to be really difficult for young seminarians, that they have been tarred with this same brush, because the majority of priests aren't sexual predators. And what does that mean if you're a young priest sort of who has to kind of shoulder this burden and reputation? It must be very difficult. And I think it will take several generations before the trust is rebuilt here.
Several generations. How do you think that Pope Francis has dealt with all of this?
Unfortunately for Francis, the sex abuse crisis has really been the first serious blow to his reputation. So at the beginning of the year, when he defended a bishop in Chile and insisted on confirming him as bishop despite the rumors that were surrounding him, and even accused people of slandering him, that really ruined his reputation on this issue, which is the sort of original sin for the Catholic Church. So for Francis now, he has to act quickly and decisively, and there have to be no more mistakes.
It's just such a grim, dark story when we talk about the abuse within the Catholic Church. Is there any sort of silver lining in all of this, Candida?
I think perhaps the fact that we're now talking about seminarians has sort of dulled the sense that it's the Catholic Church as a hierarchy against the sort of vulnerable laity, because now we see that there are clerics themselves who have been preyed upon and have been exploited by the church. We realize it's not priests versus laity, it's individual predators against the vulnerable.
Candida, I'm so grateful you could join us.
Thank you.
Thank you.